This is the Royal Blue Podcast from the Liverpool Echo.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Royal Blue Podcast, where the three of us are still in our separate little isolation stations stationed across Merseyside. I'm your host Adam Jones today, joined by Dave Prentice and Chris Beesley, and despite being in isolation, there's still Everton news to talk about. We'll always find Everton news to talk about on this podcast. And we'll start with an Everton legend making quite an interesting point this morning, I think it was. Speaking to Irish Independent, Graeme Sharp has said believes that the Premier League season should now just be null and void. Preno, what are your thoughts? Do you agree with the Everton ambassador?
I don't. And, I totally, Sharpie is a genuine bona fide Everton legend, 24-carat legend, and it's very rare that I do disagree with him. But I suspect he's given this interview with just a little bit of a kind of, because I suspect it is going to be a very, very popular view, certainly on, one half of Merseyside. But morally, I just don't get it. I just think when you've got as far as we have into the season, I think you need to do what you can to try and complete it. And that's even bearing in mind the financial logistics. I know Sky, we've seen stories recently saying that Sky aren't going to enforce the 300 million or so, I think it is, that, so the club still owe them if the league can't be completed. But there are still some financial issues to investigate. But beyond all that, I just think morally, when you've got as far as you can into the league season, you need to do whatever you can to try and complete it. It's not like 1939-40, which is the last possible scenario that is even vaguely reminiscent of this, when there were only 3 matches played, and when Everton were unbeaten, and Tommy Lawton had scored in all 3, and defending the title. Obviously, the championship was completely so null and voided then, and they went into regional football. This is very different, and I think there is still a possibility that the league could be concluded. Obviously, it won't be until at least we can see football starting again. But there is a time scale where that can be done and where the following season can be started, so maybe in September. That can still logistically be done. So whilst that is still a possibility, I still think we have to investigate that. I know Sharpie said in his interview that he doesn't really get playing behind closed doors. And I understand his reticence not to do that. It's artificial football. It's anaesthetised football, but it is ball, so it is competitive. So I think, we do need to try and investigate that. Obviously, if the coronavirus pandemic doesn't peak, doesn't plateau, and we're still seeing figures rising by June, clearly then you do have to look at what he's saying, maybe about null and voiding it. But until then, I think we do need to try and bring it to a conclusion as best we can. And, so while that is still a possibility, I would urge trying to do that rather than what Sharp is saying at the moment.
I think Bees Brenner makes a good point there. Like it does seem quite early to be talking about things like this, doesn't it? We are still in April at the end of the day, and I know with the situation as the country as a whole still stands, it doesn't look to be slowing down at any particular rate at all, but it does seem quite early to be talking about null and void in the season when you can still run into the summer months.
Yeah, I'm assuming what Graeme says, because obviously we're fortunate enough to know Graeme, and we know he's not the type of individual who will make shock jock type of comments or even sort of remarks that are going to be deliberately inflammatory. He's not like that at all, but he genuinely feels that under these circumstances that football has to take a back seat. But like as Dave has said, we are actually 3/4 of the way through this season. It's very different. I mean, it would have been a real big call to make if the season had to be stopped halfway through, because Liverpool already had a massive lead at the top of the table halfway through, and if we still had half a season left to play, it could be very difficult to complete. I think given that we are 3/4 of the way through, exercise caution and just wait until we can complete this season rather than thinking about seasons that haven't even started. I mean, Graeme mentions the fact that we're going to have to start the 2020-21 season, and I think we've not even kicked a ball with that. So I think let's get this season completed first, because it's not just Liverpool's title on the line here. It's various European places, Champions League places, the relegation places, because that's the big one, because some teams are going to get off the hook and avoid relegation, and you're going to have some very disappointed teams at the top of the Championship miss out. So many things that have to be completed, and given that it is only 9 or 10, and I think some couple of teams have got 10 games to go. I mean, realistically, you could complete that within about a 6-week period, I think, even if we are looking about mid-late summer.
I think we could be guided as well by what's happening on the continent. I mean, clearly, Germany and Spain are, several weeks ahead of us in terms of, sort of the pandemic's, sort of scale and growth. So, the 4 leagues went into lockdown for ours, and we're told that the Bundesliga, especially, their clubs are back in training now. I think John Joe Kenny has been interviewed about how strange it is, so trying to exercise social distancing while training. So they are doing that. They are actually training, trying to keep a distance from each other. I think the view is to try and return to the Bundesliga action in the middle of May behind closed doors. I think we can, sort of observe what happens there, so see how it works. If it is, in inverted commas, a successful experiment, it's something that we could carry out here. But just to reiterate, it seems a bit early still to be talking about null and voiding it. It might have to come to that, so June maybe, but certainly for the time being. I think let's just sit tight, see what happens, and so plan hopefully to sort of restore football sooner rather than later.
I think it's interesting European leagues though, because does that create another sort of in itself? What happens in Bundesliga do manage, let's say, to finish their season by mid-July, let's say something like that, but get start. You'd be in the Premier League with that to null and void itself, but the Bundesliga have managed to complete their season. What happens to the likes of the Europa League, the Champions League next season? It's all just going to be a bit of a mess.
That's horrific to even think of that, isn't it? Yeah, so if one league manages to complete there, another doesn't. You could have a season whereby no English clubs are allowed entry into Europe. You could have a situation whereby they take the finishing positions as they are now. It's a complete grey area, to be honest, and one that Premier League officials would prefer not to investigate at the moment. I think just like sort of sit tight and try and plan for a season to be concluded. And all the meetings that the Premier League officials have had so far have had that as an end game. They actually said that is what they want to do, so they're planning for a season to be completed eventually. I mean, as far as I'm aware, that hasn't changed yet. That is still, sort of the ultimate, sort of end. But that can change, of course. Things are very, very flexible at the moment, and there's a much big picture at play at the moment. So what's going on in the world generally?
Yeah, and I think that's a point that Graeme was making in his piece, wasn't it, Bees? That, while we all obviously care about football, we're all football fans, of course, but there are just wider implications, and there are more important things in the world at the minute, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, that's the concern. Everyone is obviously itching to get back out there, whether that's football or just or life. But there's a issue with if you come back too soon. I mean, the sort of the awful ramifications that we could have with that. I think it's better to just wait and get things right. Like I said, whether if that means it's games behind closed doors. I don't even know what that would mean for men and women. I mean, would the media be attending? Just who would be there? Are you going to be there a couple of spaces down from your colleagues when they talk about behind closed doors? I don't know what that would actually entail. There's even been some bizarre shouts about playing games at Wembley or St George's Park. I think that's a bit of a far-fetched scenario. I think at least play them in the stadiums, even if you've not got the fans. But yeah, it's all about just sitting tight and coming to the right decisions when it's safe, and when rather than rushing back, and then you don't want anything like the health concerns if we all just come back too soon. So yeah, it's unprecedented, and that's why it's so messy for something like football, which is so structured over the calendar with the season. So we've just got to sit tight, and hopefully things will work out for the best.
And of course, whenever or if this season ends, of course, we've got a transfer window to contend with in the summer. I think it's going to look a little bit different this year than it had the other time, but it will no doubt still be there. And the transfer rumour mill hasn't stopped. And today for Everton, it has stopped quite handily on Gylfi Sigurdsson. Now, Football Insider believe that Everton would be prepared to sell at a huge loss for Gylfi Sigurdsson. Obviously, the club's record signing, signed in the summer of 2017. had a fantastic campaign last season, didn't he, Breno? Joint top scorer alongside Richarlison. This season, a little bit different, hasn't it?
It's been massively different, yeah, and it underlines really what a very niche position that, so Gylfi Sigurdsson seems to hold in the team. I'm a fan. I've said this many times on this podcast. In fact, Everton's new video that accompanies their Facebook post at the moment, it's got like this lovely little, all kinds of action from the club's history, and it shows you the Gylfi Sigurdsson goal at Goodison Park. I'm not sure who it was against, but it just underlines like the talent that he has. It was like an effortless strike, so looking one way, bending the ball into the opposite corner. He's capable of doing that. He's capable of opening up defenses. He's capable of creating things. Appears to be only capable of doing that playing as number 10, and so a system that accommodates a number 10. Now Carlo Ancelotti clearly doesn't play with a number 10, so he plays so a more rigid 4-4-2, and obviously he's included Sigurdsson in that system, and it hasn't been successful, so he hasn't appeared to be capable of adapting to that system. He scored very, very few goals. I mean, it was in the League Cup, was that his only goal this season? I can't really think of many others.
West Ham was the bench.
Yeah, it's stark, really, the actual contrast to what we saw last season from him and what we're seeing from him this season. And it does seem to be revolved around entirely, so the role he plays in the team. He still gives everything. I mean, I know I've seen criticism from some supporters saying that he's gone missing in matches and he's been hiding in matches. I'm not so sure that's necessarily the case. I think a lot of it appears to be just the fact that he doesn't seem to fit the system particularly well. But it gives Everton a major dilemma and a major headache because he's, reaching not quite the veteran status, but not far off it now. And he's on a huge salary. So Everton are going to have to accept a huge reduction in the fee they paid for him, just to find a football club that will actually pay the kind of wages that he will want, commensurate with what he's getting at Everton at the moment. It's a headache, and it's not the only one. I mean Theo Walcott is another player in a similar position, similar age, or similar wage levels. There's no suggestion Everton want to move Theo Walcott on at the moment. I mean, he does play in an area of the team that Everton are massively blessed with options, so you can still see a role and a future for him. But maybe Gylfi Sigurdsson. So I sort of guess, why the club are probably prepared to take that, major hit on him, just because he's a player that doesn't really fit into the system that the manager wants to use at the moment. So totally understand that. And it's sad, a great man there he is, but I totally understand why the club want to do that.
I mean, Gylfi Sigurdsson's position it's not just an issue that we've had this season, of course. I think in his first season, he was playing a lot from the left wing, wasn't he? And I think that was because of our summer where we signed about 10 number 10s. Yeah. So he was pushed out onto the left wing instead. And to be honest, we've seen him move out onto the left-hand side a couple of times, even just before this break. We saw it against Arsenal and against Chelsea. I think so. This problem with Gylfi Sigurdsson's position isn't really new. So in terms of having him adapt to a new system, do you think he's going to be able to do that this late in his career?
Well, I think when I speak to people in his native Iceland, they tell me quite a lot. He actually plays in a 4-4-2 as a more conventional central midfielder for them, but he doesn't seem to be particularly comfortable or effective in that role, and he's actually struggled even in his favoured number 10 role. Like we said, that first season, not Gylfi's fault whatsoever. He was shunted around there. He was club's record signing. Yet they'd signed Wayne Rooney and Davy Klassen before he'd even come through the door. And they were trying to accommodate him out on the wing. But even under Marco Silva, even playing a 4-2-3-1, which supposedly favours the role he wants to operate in, he was struggling then. And for me, he's a player of great moments, of spectacular highlight reel moments, like Dave mentioned, that one that's been used in a club montage there. Yeah, it's easy on the eye, and there's some fantastic goals there. And like they were last season when he was joint top scorer, I think it was his best return of his career. But when those goals dry up, and which they have done this season, it's very difficult to see what tangibly he's bringing to the team. Like as Dave said, he is a willing runner. His fans always say that he's got these great running stats. He's accused of going missing, but he's certainly not a player who doesn't put a shift in. But when those goals dry up and he isn't bringing you those highlight reel moments, it is difficult to see what he's bringing in. If Carlo isn't going to play a formation which does accommodate him in that number 10, as we said, Carlo favours 4-4-2 or the Christmas tree, the 4-3-2-1, which he's played. Either way, there's no natural role for Sigurdsson there. So yeah, at 30 years of age, it probably is going to be difficult for him to adapt to be a conventional central midfielder within a 4-4-2, especially when you've got Andre Gomez beside him as well. I mean, there's not a great deal of bite there. And what he might have been able to do it for Iceland, but doing it for the Premier League for Everton on a regular basis, that's totally different.
Yeah, I think international football is so different to Premier League football. You know, you do get a little bit more time on the ball. You know, so defenses will sit a little bit deeper. You don't get quite that frantic hurly-burly that you tend to get in Premier League games. So you can understand him maybe having the ability to dictate games a little bit more. He's never done that in the Premier League. Like you say, we've seen isolated moments of brilliance, you know, genuine brilliance. But we've actually seen him dictate a football match. And in 4-4-2, you do want to see, you know, central midfielders that will control a game and that will, you know, sort of dictate the momentum of a match and the pace of a match. Andre Gomez can do that. You see him doing that regularly. He's involved often enough to do that. Sigurdsson isn't really a player that gives and goes, that moves the ball around. He's a player that will hold the ball up and then, you know, so try and look for something to open up in front of him. You'd imagine, you know, so 4-4-2 would be better suited to him because you'd have players wide, you'd have two strikers he can aim at rather than one. But it's not worked out that way. He's not a player that fits into that system, I'm afraid. And, you know, clearly that is why. You know, so we're seeing stories like we're seeing this morning about Everton maybe prepared to accept such a huge, you know, so loss. And even that's a worry, you know, because given, you know, so the financial situation at the club, can we really be afford to be taking 20 and 30 million hits on players? But that's not what we're going to be taking on Gylfi Sigurdsson. But, you know, that would then generate a huge salary that, you know, can maybe be offered elsewhere. It's sad, it's reluctant, but it's something the club may have to look at.
Well, I think going back to the Bees just made then, I think it would be unwise of us to just blame this on a positional or like a formation change for Sigurdsson, because even under Marco Silva at the start of this season, there were questions over Sigurdsson. You know, Alex Iwobi was playing in that number 10 role, and he seemed to be, you know, much more comfortable in the way the whole team was playing. So, of course, Iwobi will be facing the same issue that Sigurdsson is under the new Ancelotti system. You know, he's an attacking midfielder who is going to have to adapt. He's probably going to have to adapt to play more of a left wing role. Is it just an age factor maybe that we're seeing difference in opinion Iwobi and Sigurdsson, or is it just the fact that Iwobi is more adept to being able to switch over?
I don't know. We could argue that we've not seen nothing like the best of Alex Iwobi at the moment as well. I know he's become a bit of you know, sort of figure that the fans like to point the finger at the moment. You know, so one of those guys that seems to be at the brunt of criticism when things go wrong. But certainly when he started, you know, he looked bright enough. He had, you know, so a handful of, you know, so quite interesting, you know, performances. But he's young, you know, he's got time on his side. And, you know, so yes, you can, you know, so hope that there will be improvements. You're not going to see much more improvement from Gylfi Sigurdsson, are you? You know, so I think you could argue you've seen the absolute best of him. It also points a little bit towards the club's recruitment policy. I know it's been written in the past that the club recruited last summer based on a 4-3-3 system that Marco Silva never actually played. So players were recruited to fit a system that, you know, was very, very quickly obsolete. So, you know, a little bit of finger pointing at Marco Silva maybe there. But you know, Alex Iwobi is one for the future. Certainly he's a player that we can see, you know, sort of more improvement from, and hopefully we'll see more improvement from. Sigurdsson, maybe not. We've certainly seen the best of him. So it's unfortunate. But there are changes in the squad this summer. And, you know, Carlo Ancelotti needs to build a squad that he's happy with and he's comfortable with. And if Sigurdsson's not part of that, you know, so be it. Football's a ruthless business.
Yeah, I think Brandon makes a good point there, doesn't he, Bees? You know, there's got to be a lot of change at Everton this summer. Obviously, we don't know how the transfer window is going to shape up, and maybe that might affect how much business Everton can do in the summer. But do you think maybe Sigurdsson is a player that you'd say we get him out, we can get at least a fee for him, and then we can try and reinvest that into other areas of the pitch?
Yeah, I mean, Everton were always going to take a big loss on Sigurdsson, even if he'd been a roaring success, because they signed him at the age of 27. So whether he'd been a success or a failure, by the time you'd finished with him, you were going to get very little in return compared to that massive fee that they actually paid on him in the first place. But yeah, I think it's going to be a big issue is can get somebody to take him on maybe a lesser light, maybe, you know, if he wants to be, you know, a big fish in a small pond like he'd been at Swansea in the past, maybe somebody, obviously they're not in the Premier League anymore, but that sort of equivalent club might be willing to take a gamble on a big name player like Sigurdsson. But I think it is a concern just getting him out the door. It's like it's been with so many of these players who've been signed on big wages, whether it's obviously it's to compare him to just downright flops like Sandro Ramirez or somebody like Yannick Bolasie. Or Everton has struggled with so many of these players just to get them off the books, and it's going to be, like we say, whether there is a future for Theo Walcott or not, but he's similar, you know, a player on a big salary wrong side of 30 now. It's a question of how many can they offload before they bring him in, because Farhad Moshiri is, you know, his ambition for the club can't be questioned at all, but he's under huge restraints with financial fair play now. I mean, Everton been linked with, you know, players like Gareth Bale, Aaron Ramsey, and it's like fantasy football. As much as you'd like to see those sort of stellar names coming in, and somebody like Carlo Ancelotti, arguably, if anyone was going to attract them to the club, it would be someone like him. But you just can't go out now with a blank checkbook, as it were, and sign all these huge names. You have got to balance the books because of financial fair play. They're the restraints that you've got to work under, and get the likes of Sigurdsson and who else out the door first before you can rebuild that squad.
Yeah, I just wonder whether, you know, so an upwardly mobile championship club, you know, so I see Sigurdsson as, you know, a project we're taking on board, similar to like Derby County and Wayne Rooney. Obviously, he's not got the same, you know, sort of status or, you know, the same name in the game as Wayne Rooney has. But, you know, so equally, he's got the ability, you know, sort of to make a big difference into a side looking to, you know, sort of get out of the championship. Whether a championship club could afford the kind of wages he's on, though, is a completely different matter altogether. And again, this comes back to the coronavirus situation. You know, football, the landscape of football is going to change quite significantly. We're already talking about, you know, so players taking, you know, so pay cuts, you know, clubs being forced to cut their financial costs accordingly. Whether that will leave Everton in a situation where they can't really move the player on because nobody else can afford him, or whether Everton might have to force, you know, so part of his wages to move him on, is another matter altogether. So yeah, there's a few factors to this, but it's a situation that Everton, it sounds, you know, so Everton have made a decision on, and you know, the sooner it happen, well, the better for all parties concerned.
Mm-hmm. All right, so moving on. Of course, in a normal circumstance, mid-April, we'd probably be looking at FA Cup semi-final sort of time right now, and that's meant a couple of anniversaries have been brought up. One very good, and one I have to say very bad. Should we get the bad one out the way first? And we'll remember
finish on a high. Yeah,
that's what I'm thinking. Yeah. So we'll get the 2012 one out the way first. Everton's second most recent FA Cup semi-final, of course. Everton against Liverpool. Things were all going so well when Jelavic put us ahead in the first half, and then a couple of really costly mistakes happened in the second half. Yeah, Prentice, what are your memories?
Why are you doing this to me? I can remember so many things about it. Certainly the fact that the squad that David Moyes had to play with at that time was so thin on the ground. I mean, the fact that Maggie Gay actually played, you know, that game. He had a good game in the quarterfinal at Sunderland, and you know, the replay played really well. But that was probably his one standout performance as an Everton winger. So to go in a semi-final with him starting the match on the left, you know, so it was a problem straight away. But Everton were in better form than Liverpool at the time. Liverpool had, I think, their third choice goalkeeper in goal that day.
Yeah, Brad Jones. Yeah.
So you know, so we were very, very optimistic. And of course, you know, so Jelavic was like a striker on fire at that time. And I always remember, obviously, you know, so him scoring the goal, Liverpool making a mistake. They were going in at half-time leading and playing particularly well. But in the second half, retreating into their shell, which seemed to be a thing, you know, so during the David Moyes era, It's almost like, so what we have, we hold. I'm not suggesting that came from the manager. I think maybe the players themselves just, found themselves in a situation whereby, because they hadn't beaten Liverpool for so long, it was right, so we must hold this. We must try and, sit tight on what we've got. And I always remember there's a guy who worked for the Times at the time, Tony Evans, who wrote a piece earlier that day, saying that, so was it at half time even, he mentioned this, he says that, so he's not concerned, he's not worried, because sooner or later, Everton will remember who they are. And it was like a bit of a smart-ass kind of comment to come out with. But equally, it did underline the two mentalities at large at the time. The fact that Everton hadn't beaten Liverpool for so long. And eventually that dawn realization of, so wow, we were in a position where we could actually win this. Suddenly, so came to the forefront of the mind. And Liverpool equally, we get the confidence in knowing that they always had a good spell against Everton. We just never quite expected the good spell to come in the manner in which it came. Sylvain distant, Lord knows I sort of got possessed him, but to turn around, not look, and just roll a ball straight into, of all people, Luis Suarez's path. It was an absolutely tragic mistake. I still remember, his demeanour after the game, that really contrite and, really apologetic visage he had as he walked up to the Everton supporters, and he didn't get any flack for it. Everybody knew it was just one of those horrendous mistakes that sometimes happens. And of course, that was the turning point. But equally, it wasn't the it wasn't the goal which decided the game. That was a corner, so right at the end, which again particularly well defended. And Andy Carroll did one of the few good things he'd done in his entire Liverpool career. It was a horrible, horrible, grim day. Grand National Day as well, I recall. So I remember getting out of the ground, so as soon as I could, and actually listening to the race on the way home. And sure enough, my horse didn't win either. So it was just a dreadful day all round, and not one I remember with any kind of fondness whatsoever.
Yeah, well, it was quite the day for the city, wasn't it? Like, I mean, that's the first all Liverpool clash that I can remember at Wembley. That's me showing me age a little bit there, really, isn't it? Bees, do you have any different memories from that one?
Cheers all up during the lockdown. It was awful from an Everton point of view, in that, like I said, because the Derby record had been so poor for so long, this was seen in Blues' eyes as being that big chance that they would finally get one over on Liverpool, and in a big game, because not only had they had such a terrible Derby record, going back even beyond when that poor Derby record started, they'd always come up short in the big games against Liverpool for a variety of different reasons. I'm not going to get Dave on that again, but with it being cup semi-final in the past, cup finals in the past, this was going to be the one big game that Everton would win against Liverpool. They, like Dave said, although they had a few selection issues going into the match, and we're actually the team in form, finished above Liverpool that season. Obviously, Dalglish was heading for the sack that season. He ended up winning the League Cup and getting to the FA Cup final because of that. But they just fell off the cliff in the league. They'd lost their first two choice keepers, like we said. Brad Jones was in their third choice, but he wasn't even tested, despite Everton going into the lead. But we've said already, through Jelavic, who was enjoying a real purple patch at that time. Yeah, they just collapsed. They just on the big occasion, whether you can point the finger at the manager or not, those various different teams under David Moyes throughout his long tenure, there were various points where we thought they should have done better. For me, there was that one. The huge one was the UEFA Cup, when Zenit St. Petersburg beat Rangers in the final in 2008. I think that was seen as a huge missed opportunity. And this was another one. You thought this was a real chance for Everton to go out and achieve something, and for David Moyes to win that silverware, and to fall flat, and for the way, like I said, the manner of the defeat in that. Because remember, Everton's goal was a terrible mistake, wasn't it, Jamie Carragher? So it was almost like this time going, well, you call that a mistake? This is a mistake. And then obviously, of all people, Andy Carroll, who was getting absolute dog's abuse from all the Copites for his performance, to come up and head in the way. Yeah, it had everything in terms of being like awful from an Evertonian's point of view.
It just looking at the fixtures from that season now, and it just underlines again that Merseyside derby mentality that, so Everton seem to have and, so sadly currently still seem to possess. That was the only match Everton lost from mid-March through to the end of the season. They were on a great run of form, so beat Swansea, Sunderland, West Brom, battered Sunderland 4-0, so in a league game. Then had the derby match. The very next match after the derby basically cost Man United the title. Leading and drawing that game 4-4. Battered Fulham 4-0, went through to the end of the season unbeaten. Just the one absolute, star game that stands out was that derby match. And you do have to put that down probably to mental strength on the day. So Liverpool had a little bit stronger mentality than Everton did, unfortunately.
Right, you thought a good one.
Come on, move on to the good one.
only Dave remembers this one.
Everton, Southampton, 1984, 1-0. Adrian. What a day, Preno.
It was one of the most riotously celebrated Everton goals ever in the club's history. So genuinely, it was absolutely incredible. Because if you remember the semi, you don't remember because you're 40.
He wasn't born. I don't remember.
The semi-finals that year, we got the dodgy draw. I mean, Southampton were a very good side at the time. They had Peter Shilton in goal, Mills, Frank Worthington, lots of very, very good players, and they were a good side on a decent run of form. The other semi-final was Watford against Plymouth. Plymouth Argyle, I think, was third tier at the time. So, if we'd have got Plymouth or Watford, we'd have been at Wembley, no problem. The fact drew Southampton was, well, if we can somehow get past Southampton, we've got every confidence we're going to actually win the cup this year. So it was a huge game. And Everton had played, it was down at Highbury, Everton had played so well, created chances, missed a couple of chances. Neville hadn't really been threatened all that much during the course of the game. But it got later and later, went into extra time, and it got, so literally into the last, dying minutes of extra time. I was thinking, well, it's looking at the days when they had replays for semi-final then. And it was a free kick, I think, in the far corner. Peter Reid took it. And it was one of those that he clipped in. And I think Derek Manfield got a little touch on the ball at the near post. It went to the far post and it just sat up for Adrian Heath. And he just knew that if he connected, so it's going to be a goal. It's in the last minute of extra time of an FA Cup semi-final. Everton are going to Wembley against two teams that you really fancied we would beat. It was a massive moment. And he did. He guided it in beautifully. And the place just went absolutely ballistic. There was a mad pitch invasion. It took a long time for the other fans to get back to the side of the other pitch again. Saw time, and there was another mad pitch invasion. I think it ended in fairly savoury scenes, to be honest, on the pitch. There was a fair bit of fighting going on the pitch afterwards. But it was an incredible moment. And I always remember the Daily Post, the morning newspaper on Merseyside on Monday. And I think, was it Richard Williams, who was the photographer at the time, and he was lying on the turf behind the goal. And so as Adrian Heath scored the goal, he ran across with his arms outstretched and literally ran over Richard. And Richard just turned his camera up. And as Inchy looks down, and it's just this absolutely wonderful image of Inchy looking down with this look of absolute ecstasy on his face, with his arms outstretched, gazing at the camera. And it just made for that wonderful moment. Richard will never take a better picture again in his life because everything just clicked at the right time. And, so fortunately, the Daily Post used it so well. It was basically dated their back page on the Monday morning. But it was just an absolutely wondrously received moment because, Everton were going to Wembley, and the mid-80s as well, it was a time when the FA Cup final was still a massive, massive occasion. The descent of the FA Cup in terms of, stature and prestige hadn't quite started yet. It was still a massive competition. And so for Everton to go to Wembley, and we knew we were going to, whoever won in the other game, as it was, Riley scored, Watford won that game, but we knew we'd have every chance of winning that as well. So it was a massive, massive moment. And of course, it was only a month or so after the original, Wembley gathering of Everton and Liverpool Cup final, when we won and drawn 0-0. In a very, very different circumstance to the one we've just talked about. So it was, I remember that so fondly, that game. It was a wonderful moment, a wonderful goal. And Adrian Heath, so probably one of the, saying unsung hero, because he does get credit, maybe not quite credit he deserves, because the start of the following season, 84-85, he was absolutely on fire. He was the number one, striker at Everton. Adrian and Andy and Graeme Sharp were struggling well down a place in that team. It was either of them and Adrian Heath because he was playing so well. And then obviously everyone remembers, the bad injury he sustained in the tackle with Brian Marwood, and he was never quite the same again after that. After he was at his peak, and it was scoring of the most wonderfully celebrated goals in Everton's history. You'd be far too young to remember it, Adam. Bezo, I don't know. Do you remember it as a small boy, maybe?
I was 4 years old, but Adam was a
very small boy.
Yeah.
I mean, for Bees, I suppose then for us being able to look back at this in the context of Everton's history, it seems like a pivotal goal in, the future of what was Everton's greatest ever team.
Yeah, well, maybe we were obviously bemoaning the lack of trophies now at Everton and lack of cup finals and stuff. And you remember, it was actually 16 years since Everton had been in the cup final. At that point, since 68, when they'd lost to West Brom, they were heavy favourites back in 68. They'd lost then. So 16 years in, and then in that prevailing period, Liverpool had gone on for the first time to really dominate English football. So yeah, I think it's shown in its context where people are watching the Howard's Way film. It was seen as this really start of this great renaissance for Everton. Obviously, didn't last as long as we would have hoped, but for the next few years, Everton were going to be the match, and at times more than the match of for Liverpool, and this is where it all started.
Mm-hmm. It's funny actually, because people always talk about turning points, and obviously in '84, everybody always looks at the Oxford back pass as being a turning point because Howard Kendall's job was saved, even though Philip Carter made it patently clear you're never going to sack him. Some of the players in that squad talk about maybe the Birmingham City game around about the same time. I think Andy Gray always, sort of earmarks that one. And some people say the FA Cup tie at Stoke when Alan Irvine scored that, sort of incredible, sort of amazing goal to start that cup run. But one that often isn't mentioned is that FA Cup semi-final. And it was because, sort of winning a trophy gives a squad of players such an incredible degree of self-belief and confidence. Once you've won a trophy, I think if you can win it, you can win more, you can do it again. And by Everton beating Southampton and getting through to Wembley against a team they were comfortable or confident of beating, it was a turning point. It was a pivotal fixture in Everton's history. So yeah, you can't really underestimate how big that goal from Adrian Heath was. And, I love seeing it, so you see it every now and then, so look back on YouTube or it'll crop up somewhere on social media. And it was just such a great moment and a great afternoon. And it did mean a huge amount in Everton football's history.
Well, fingers crossed next season, whenever that takes place, Ancelotti will be able to find that next turning point for Everton. I think we'll leave it there on that high point. Thank you for listening to the Royal Blue podcast. Remember, you can rate and subscribe to us on any of your podcast platforms. You can join in the conversation with us on Facebook as well at the Royal Blue podcast. Thank you for listening.